Welcome to Passion Inspires. Join us as we explore the world of marketing and design and share insights and stories that spark inspiration and drive meaningful change. Welcome everyone to Passion Inspires, and today I'm so honored to have Keith Hopkins, owner, president of Hopkins Fundraising Consulting. Keith, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really honored to have you. We began working with each other, we thought at least 10 years back, on a capital campaign for Family Promise at Grand Rapids at that time. And that's the first time that I met you.
Right.
And you were their consultant for running the campaign, where our agency obviously complemented that with the marketing side. But I'm so happy to have you here because I've admired you from day one, how you run a meeting from very first meeting with someone who needs a capital campaign all the way to when that building is completed.
Yeah.
And I would like to have you begin by just getting to know you better.
Sure.
Like, how did you end up in doing campaigns for a career?
Yeah.
Kind of what led you to that spot, and then I'd like to hear some stories beyond that.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for the invite to be here. It's great to see you again. So, I didn't choose to do this kind of work. I didn't even know you could do this kind of work. I knew a little bit about philanthropy because my dad in Kalamazoo was the head of the Kalamazoo Community Foundation for many years before he retired. So I knew fundraising. I knew that there was fundraising. I knew there was giving, but it was primarily from a community foundation standpoint. And, let's face it, when you're a teenager, you're not thinking a lot about your dad's career, right? I wasn't. Yeah. So when I went to college, I went to Hope, and then I ended up at grad school in Ohio and studied public policy and political science and history. And then when I got out of my master's program, I had basically two paths. I could be a lawyer or I could go teach. And I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer because I was newly married and I didn't want to go to more school. I wanted to make a living. And so I ended up getting a job at the community college here in town. And I taught at the community college for about 2.5 to 3 years, and then took a job at another community college in Illinois and was hired in on a contract that was teaching for 9 months of the year and then administrative for the summers. So I never had my summers off as a teacher. And I did that for another 4 years. So I was in teaching, and I taught college kids, and kind of figured my career would always be in education. But when we had children and we wanted to move back home, I started looking for teaching jobs, and we were in a recession at the time, and no one was, at the state level, there was not a lot of hiring around higher ed. And I knew a guy who was in the fundraising business who was doing campaigns, and he had reached out to me prior to this and said, hey, if you ever want to make a change, you ever think about doing this kind of work, we hire people coming out of education backgrounds.
Interesting.
And we're looking to break into the community college market. So I called Roger, and he was good enough to invite me up to be interviewed with a firm called Monahan Associates, which is no longer in business. And they were, at the time, it was basically three guys in their late 50s, and I was in my very, very early 30s. I think I was maybe 30 or 31 when I was hired. And they brought me on to kind of teach me the business. And I think at the time, I didn't realize this, but I think at the time they thought, well, maybe this guy will be the future of the business.
Yeah,
and
that
so
makes sense.
Yep. So I was there for 10 years. And then they did ask me to buy the business. They came to me one day and said, hey, how about you invest in the business and become the eventual owner with another person? There were two of us that they approached, and they wanted a lot of money, and I had pretty young kids. And so at the time I said, I think if I'm going to take a risk, I'll do this on my own. So I've been in business now for 19 years. It's in my 20th year now. And like you, we're just comparing notes, right? And so I've been doing this for about 20 years. So in all, about 30 years of campaign work between Monahan and my own business, and it's kept me busy.
So I'm curious, did they do more than capital campaign consulting, or tell me more about what you learned in those 10 years?
Yeah, they were probably, I'd say, about 85% campaigns, and then they did a little bit of annual fund consulting, and that's pretty much what I do. I'm probably closer to 90% campaigns or even more than that. I don't do a lot with annual funds. On occasion, I help with annual fundraising. What typically happens is I'll work with a client on a campaign, and then coming out of a campaign, they might say to me, hey, can you help us with our annual fund? Or can you help us with some board development? Or can you help us hire a new development person? And so I might do a little bit of that work, but not much. I like campaigns. That's what I've always been good at, and that's what I want to continue to do. So I try to keep my focus really narrow.
I know you do work all over West Michigan. Is it beyond that into the region as well?
Yeah, so I've done kind of work throughout the upper Midwest, but
Okay.
most of my recent work has been Michigan. I've been really fortunate and blessed that I have not had to jump on planes too much. I did earlier in my career. I was
Okay.
driving further away and on occasion flying, but don't do much of that anymore, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways that someone could mismanage a campaign or get it
There are.
wrong.
Yes, there are. Yes, there are many, many ways.
What are some of the landmines that are the kind of the danger zones that why I'm leading toward why someone like you is really critically needed?
Yeah.
What kind of things can go wrong if it's not managed well?
Well, usually, Jeff, people call me typically when, so a nonprofit is doing their day-to-day work. They're feeding the hungry, or they're housing people, or they're doing youth programming, or whatever their mission is. And then they come to a point where they realize, hey, we need a lot of money to do something, either get a new building or renovate a space, our roof's going out, or our utilities are, a boiler at a school is gone and we need to replace that and it's going to be expensive. Or they might have programs they want to launch that are brand new, or they might want to build some endowment, or oftentimes all three of those things at once. Get a new building, launch some new programs, and build endowment, right? So that's usually why when my phone rings, because the development person typically who's in charge of the fundraising realizes, hey, I'm going to have to, for the first time in my life, raise millions and millions of dollars. I've never done a big campaign. Most have not done big campaigns. And I'm not sure where to start. And so usually it's a call to somebody like me. And once we start to talk, I think oftentimes development people who have not been through campaigns, they realize, oh, I really don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Most campaigns from beginning to end with a feasibility study on the front end and then a full campaign, you're talking at least a year and a half of work, and real focused work in addition to all of your other job responsibilities, meeting with donors and doing grants and doing direct mail and social media and awareness building and meeting with donors. So it's an extra layer of work on top of what you're already doing. And I think the development director realizes, I'm going to be judged by my boss and by my board on how well this campaign comes out. So I want to make sure we hit a home run. I don't want to struggle with it because that could impact my job. And then there's another layer beyond the development folks. You've got board members and then eventually campaign chairs. And these are usually people in communities with, fairly high name recognition and reputation. And they don't want to put their name on something that's going to crash and burn. So almost always they call somebody like me to say, hey, you've done a lot of these. I've done close to 300 campaigns in the 30 years I've been doing this.
That's incredible.
And so most development directors, I think in West Michigan, I'd say there's probably fewer than 4 or 5 people that have done more than 3 campaigns that are in fundraising roles for their organization. And I can think of them right off the top of my head. But so, think about that. Someone who's done maybe 1 or 2 campaigns and they want to make sure that they can be successful. So oftentimes they think, well, let's just call this guy who's done hundreds of them and maybe he can help us avoid some of those pitfalls.
Yeah.
And the pitfalls are many. It can be leadership incongruence, where a board and a staff don't agree on the future of the organization, which direction it's going to go. It can be a project that's not compelling. It can be a donor community that doesn't feel the buy-in to the organization. They haven't been cultivated and haven't been treated as partners. Lots of things can go wrong early on. And so that's typically why I get a call.
Yeah, there's 2 things. There's I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
And then what I think I know isn't going to be good enough anyway.
Right. Well, it's like, so as business owners, right?
Yeah.
Could we do our own taxes? Probably. Will we make a ton of mistakes? I know I would. That's why I don't do my own taxes. That's why I call an accountant who does taxes every day. I figure I could muddle through it and I might get there, but I'm probably going to make mistakes. I'm probably going to risk an audit. I'm probably going to lose money on the deal. So it's just better to hire a professional who does it every day.
And it's high stakes.
And it's high stakes, yeah.
Usually, like you said,
Yeah.
maybe their annual fund might be less than $1 million. I'm thinking of Family Promise.
Right.
And yet the campaign might be $2 million.
Right. Yeah.
So now it's raising maybe double even of their annual fund.
Yeah. Yeah, and usually
that's
it's much more than double. So, it's not uncommon for there to be an annual fund of $1 million or less, and they're running a $5 or $6 million campaign. So it's multiples of what they ever raise annually. So it takes a lot of planning and a lot of effort. Usually I tell young development people pretty early, I say, look, this is going to be a lot of work. If we end up working together, I'll be right there with you, holding your hand, making sure that we're walking side by side. You'll never have any problem reaching me or getting callbacks or emails. I'm in all the meetings. I said, but you need to realize that these are called campaigns because they're modeled on military campaigns.
Really?
Yep. So if you go back to the very beginning of when campaigns started, they basically built philanthropic campaigns on a military model. That's why they're called campaigns.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So think of a military campaign. You got a general and you got soldiers. In a philanthropic campaign, you got chairs, co-chairs, and then you have cabinet members who are the soldiers. In a military campaign, you've got a strategic battlefield plan. We're going to take so much land. We're going to try to do it by these dates. And in a capital campaign, we're going to raise X number of dollars, and we're going to have benchmarks along the way to show that we can hit our goal. And, in a military campaign, obviously, you're taking land and killing people. In a philanthropic campaign, you're trying to win as many donors to your cause as possible to reach a goal that will have greater impact on the community. So they're very similar, but the thing that they have in common is they are both incredibly organized. And there is a lot of thought on the front end to make sure that you can execute successfully through that entire period. And if you screw it up on the front end, which is usually where groups make mistakes, so sometimes, not often, but sometimes I get a call from a nonprofit that says, hey, we launched a campaign, we're 4 or 5 months in, and we're stalled. Or sometimes it's, we hired another firm, we got a little bit down the path, we weren't happy with something that happened, so we got rid of them, we want you to come in. And I typically say, guys, we can try this, but this is a lot like firing your football coach at halftime and handing the playbook to the new coach and saying, go win the game. It's very hard for the new person coming in to fix all those problems that were made on the front end. So you got to really think carefully on the front end. What's the plan look like? Who's going to help lead it? Do we have the leadership on our board and in our campaign team to get this done? Are all the staff people in the right place? Do we have a good marketing partner? There's a lot of things you got to get right to be successful, and you can't leave those to chance.
So I'm curious, if someone is 4 or 5 months into a campaign and it's stalled and it really was not a good start at all, would you recommend them to table it for a while so they can kind of restart all over again?
Oftentimes. Or you might say, okay, let's go back and have some conversations with our lead donors and find out why we're stalled. Was there something about the original case that donors didn't like or find compelling? Was the relationship not strong enough? Did you make some assumptions that donors were going to support you and they didn't? Why was that? Maybe it could be that the donors don't have confidence in the leadership, which is always a tough thing to find out, because then you got to tell a board, you got some staffing problems that you got to deal with.
So it exposes weaknesses.
Right,
possibly.
right. Campaigns always put a spotlight right on the organization. And that's another thing I tell groups early. I say, look, if you have any internal stuff, you got to clean it up, right? It could be staffing issues. It could be donor communication. It could be all kinds of different things. And all of those things are going to get exposed during campaigns. So here's a quick, easy example.
Yeah.
A donor makes a gift. My feeling is when a donor sends money or a pledge to an organization, within 48 hours, an acknowledgement letter should go out, signed by the chair, signed by the executive director, very pleasant and full of gratitude. You'd be amazed how many groups can't handle that, how many groups screw that basic thing up. And we know from tons of fundraising research that the best predictor of a second gift to a nonprofit is a speedy acknowledgement of the first gift. So there's a simple thing that some organizations just don't do well. And it's understandable in some ways because nonprofits don't have huge staffs and huge budgets. So there's sometimes people wearing a lot of hats, and some of the, maybe the smaller details can fall through the cracks. But to me, that's not a small detail. You got to keep your donors, who in business vernacular are your customers, you got to keep them happy. And if you ignore them and you don't say thanks and you don't show gratitude, then donors start to think, well, there's lots of places I could give my money. I sent these guys a check, never heard back, or I didn't hear back in a timely way. I don't even know if they got the money. I don't know if they put the money to good use. I don't know now if I can trust them. It just raises all kinds of questions in the mind of a donor. So getting little things right and stacking a lot of those little things on top of each other builds a good foundation for a campaign.
Wow, Keith, I tell you what, if we just stopped here, I feel like I got a lot out of this already. Because it sounds like you're recommending that nonprofit needs to start a campaign from a point of strength and health.
Right.
And
Right.
health in the sense of managing, stewarding
Right.
relationships.
Right.
So it's almost like they should back up and say, how are we doing at this?
Right.
And if we need to fix things, then go to Keith.
Yeah. 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 Sometimes I'll have potential clients call me, and I can tell usually in 5 minutes if they're ready for a campaign or not. I just ask a
Really?
couple key questions, like, okay, tell me about your project. How does your board feel about this? Did the board all vote to do this? Do you have any people that you think could be good chairs on your board? They don't necessarily have to be board members, but that helps. And then you ask some questions around staffing, and you can find out pretty quickly, is the executive director and the development director on the same page? Is there any kind of conflict? What's that relationship look like? And there are times when I say, hey, guys, I don't think you're ready right now. Here are some things I would do in the interim. Maybe 6 months from now, give me a call, or maybe a year from now, give me a call. The biggest single problem would be what I would call leadership incongruence, where the staff is pushing a vision that the board doesn't fully buy or doesn't adopt. Because when a board votes to do a campaign, in essence, what they're saying is not only am I going to support this with maybe my time and energy, but I'm going to make a gift to it. Because if I can't give board members to give, it's going to be really hard to get others to give. And there are many, many donors who are going to ask straight out, when you go ask them for a gift, they're going to say, did your board give? And if you say yes, they're going to say all of them. And there's only one good answer, right? You don't want to say, well, 8 of 10 did. They're going to want to know, well, why didn't the other 2 give? If you voted to do this, what's causing those other people not to support your mission? So you really have to make sure you've got really good congruence between the staff and the board before you jump in.
Wow. There's a checklist there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
So as in branding, a client comes to us and they say, well, we want a new logo, new name, new brand identity.
Yeah.
We ask why, and if they don't have the right reasons, then we don't recommend that they do it.
Yep.
How about capacity? What the very first steps, Keith, when you get involved, how do you discover whether they should move forward publicly with a campaign, like the feasibility phase?
Yeah.
Tell us about that, because that's a critical phase.
Yeah, that's really important. So the feasibility study is a lot like your GPS for your campaign. Now, again, simple illustration. If we jumped in a car together and said, hey, let's go to Florida, would we get there? We'd point our car south and start driving, right? It'd be better if we had a map, if we had our phone talking to us and telling us, turn here, turn there, right? So the feasibility study is the GPS that tells you these are the directions you need to take to hit your location, to hit your goal. So we start off with, we draft a case, and we say, okay, here's who we are as an organization, here's who we serve, here's the big challenge that we face. Could be we need a new location, could be we need to build out this program because we're seeing an increase in demand, like food banks are seeing that right now, right? A lot of food banks are suddenly like, holy smokes, we got people showing up that we've never seen before. We have to double our capacity to provide food. Or they need to build an endowment, or as I said, all 3. But you have to explain your problem and then explain your solution in that case. Our solution is we need to raise X number of dollars to do A, B, and C. Now that case gets mailed out to a selection of your donor pool, a small sample, and then I interview those folks. And the organization's not in those interviews, so that people are going to be candid because they're going to get some confidentiality. So they can say, well, I like the organization, but this piece of the vision I don't buy or I have questions about. And so we need to find that out early so that we can answer those questions proactively so that those donors, other donors out there that might have those questions can be satisfied by the answers. And then you talk to them about their leadership interest and their donorship interest. And by the time you've done those interviews and extrapolated it out to the broader community, you can then come back and say to the board, all right, we've talked to a small subset of your donor base. Here's how much I think you could raise based on the people that we talked to and the extrapolation. And now you either have to decide, do we do a campaign or do we not do a campaign? And every now and then, I'm always surprised by this, but boards will do a feasibility study, get a positive green light to do a campaign, and then decide not to do one. Doesn't happen often, but happens on occasion. And I think usually it comes down to board members realizing, oh, I'm going to have to be part of leadership. And I'm going to have to give to this.
It's more of that reason.
And it's so now I'm starting to feel this personal weight. It's not just I'm not just going to show up for a board meeting and leave. Now I'm going to have to actually plug in and help open doors to donors. And I'm going to have to be engaged in a campaign in a real way. And not every board member wants to do that. And I get that. But my advice would be, think that through before you spend the money on the study. Well, don't waste the time and the money to go do a study if you ultimately know that as a board, you're probably not doing the campaign. Why would you do that? So
I'm also curious, in that feasibility study, how often do you find, especially a major stakeholder, a major donor, how often do you find that they speak into the vision of what that campaign should truly look like, coming up with new ideas, for example?
Pretty often. So sometimes an organization will have a building in mind or a location in mind, and several donors will say, that's not a good site. I know of a better building, or a smaller building, or a building that would be a better match for their mission. Or how about a building on a bus line, because it needs to be accessible to people, and this one's not on a bus line. Right now, well, MRC down in Kalamazoo, right? It's a group that works with people that have cognitive and physical challenges and provides them workforce development and a place for community. And many, many years ago, I did a campaign for them because the building they were in sat right on the Kalamazoo River, and it flooded, and they were under like 6 feet of water. Their entire building was underwater.
Wow.
So they had to do an emergency campaign, and we ended up finding a building for them over on 26th Street in Kalamazoo, which is way out of the way, not at all visible, tucked way back behind some neighborhoods. And if you're somebody with a cognitive impairment, you've got to take like 3 different buses to get there. I mean, that'd be hard for somebody who does have a cognitive impairment, right? To transfer all those buses.
Yeah.
So now part of their new campaign is to say, we got to move. We got to move downtown Kalamazoo in the urban core. We've got to be located to our other community partners. We definitely got to be on a bus line. We want to be more visible because a lot of people know our name, but they don't know what we do. And so I was at a meeting yesterday. They just found a new building, and they're going to start moving ahead with the campaign. So
that's fantastic. Yeah. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah. They've been looking for about a year.
Yeah, we were working on that campaign together.
Right. Yep.
So that's an insightful thing, realizing that the feasibility study not only has the potential of discovering whether or not you should move forward with the campaign or what dollar amount that should be, but maybe even added insight from a major donor on what direction to take in the end.
Yeah, and not just about the campaign. When you talk to donors say to donors, hey, these are confidential interviews and you can be candid. We're never going to trace any comment you make back to your name. People open up. They talk about not just the campaign plan, but they talk about the organization as a whole. They talk about the leadership. They talk about the future of the organization, things they see as strengths, things they see as weaknesses. And you get a really good feel for the organization, how it can be better, which is great, right? It's very similar to a for-profit business doing a market study. Another example I use a lot is, like a McDonald's, before they roll out a new hamburger, they test market it, right? They throw it into 5 or 6 different communities in different parts of the country to see if you and I will buy it and eat it and buy more of it. And if we like it, they figure everybody else will like it. And if they don't sell it, then they won't roll it out. Feasibility study is no different. We're just taking a case and giving it to the donor community as a sample, saying, hey, take a bite of this, tell us what you think. And if enough of them like it, we figure the rest of the donor community will, because there's a lot of evidence that donors kind of fall into tiers, and 2nd and 3rd tier donors tend to take their cues from top tier donors often. And so, we're just testing a concept in a feasibility study.
So let's say you're going to move forward with a campaign. What are some of the next steps? Because, Keith, what I've been so impressed, we worked on at least 3 campaigns together. I was a marketing partner, you're the consultant partner, but I'm so impressed with how you manage every single step. It's so organized and thoughtful, and it keeps things moving forward, helps people know what each of them are responsible to do. Mm-hmm. I'd rather have you explain all that, but I really wanted you to come and talk about that.
Yeah. Well, as I said earlier, big plan, you try to do it in little bite-sized pieces. So I know that there are some, especially national firms will often do this, where they'll work with a nonprofit and they'll kind of show up with a big, thick binder and say, here's how we're going to do the campaign. And I can imagine the people who get those binders think, that looks like a ton of work and I don't want any part of that. So we do it, and when I do it, tiny little bites. Today, let's focus on, let's get a theme for our campaign, a tagline, and let's talk about who our chairs are going to be. And then we need to talk about the qualities that chairs need to have, and we start to look at the universe of people they know. Let's just work on that today.
Yeah.
And the next time, now we got our chairs, and we got a tagline. Now we can start to build out some marketing material, both a brochure and usually a video. Now let's start to talk about recruiting a campaign cabinet. That can be anywhere from 15 to 40 people. You got to have the right folks to do that. And while you're doing that, you're maybe massaging the case a little bit based on the feasibility results. But along each step of the way, there are all these little things you need to do. But if you try to look at the big picture, it becomes overwhelming. It's way too overwhelming.
Yeah.
Because as I said, it's a 15 to 20 month process. So you got to take it in small bites. But I think the thing that I've been pretty good at, and it just goes with my personality, I'm a very ordered and organized thinker.
Yeah, I can tell.
And that comes from my teaching background. When you get tossed into a college classroom, and I was so young when I started teaching. I was like right out of grad school. I was probably 23, maybe 20, 23, 24. I remember, they said, hey, you might want to wear a tie because you look just
young.
like the students, right? And you get tossed into that with very little, very, very little training. I mean, it's amazing. They hand you the textbook and they say, here's a sample syllabus the other guy used. Good luck. And you got to show up and you got to stay one step ahead of your class, especially those first couple years. You're really just a couple steps ahead of them. Mm-hmm. And that, at a very, very early age, taught me the only way I can get through this is I got to be on top of detail. I've got to be organized and ordered. And my teaching background has really, really been good prep for this work that I do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is 100% true, but every meeting that I've been involved with you, you're always on time when we get out, or early even. And I love that structure too, that you don't overweight people with late meetings. And
Right. Yep. Sometimes that can be a little challenging because you have to set a tone early that we're going to start on time and end on time.
Yeah.
And if you have a chair, who tends to be a little late to things, sometimes it's a little bit of a shocker to them, but you have to let them know we cannot waste volunteer time. And even though you're an important volunteer, so are all the people around this table.
Yeah.
And we're only going to get them to come back if we make good use of their time. So I tell everyone I meet with, I'm very big on 1 hour meetings. I try very hard not to go over an hour because most people have busy lives. They got to get back to work or their families or other things that they do. And, you got to remember, they're volunteers. They're not being paid to be there. They're doing it because they're good people. So you want to respect their time. And I've never, ever had a volunteer, and I'm sure you've never had this either, come up to you and say, I wish that meeting went longer. No one ever says that. They say, hey, I appreciate the fact that we finished 10 minutes early. I've had many people say that to me.
Yeah.
So you try to be really good about, there are things that we need to talk about, but there are things we can do outside of the meeting through email, phone calls that don't need a lot of discussion. And I just try to keep things moving.
And I've always loved how everyone that walks away, they know exactly what they need to do next by the next meeting.
Yep.
And it's all, like you said, bite-sized pieces. I don't think hardly anyone ever feels overwhelmed because they know that's a bite size. I can handle that.
Right.
Then I can handle the next one and the next one.
Yep.
And then in the end, you have success.
Yeah. And, you get down to the little minutia of a campaign, like, again, back to the MRC example.
Yeah.
They're just kind of beginning their fundraising.
Yeah.
And they're off to a good start. And they've got, kind of divisions within the campaign of individuals and families and businesses and then foundations. And so you take a look at foundations, and there are a lot of good foundations in Kalamazoo, but you could look at a list of 15 or 20 foundations and think to yourself, boy, that's a lot of grant applications and a lot of meetings and a lot of work I have to do. But we don't want to approach it that way. We want to say, let's do 2 this week. Let's take a look at our top 2 foundations, because same thing with the foundation community. The big foundations, the ones that are kind of the leaders in the community, if they make grants, the mid-tier and smaller foundations will tend to follow, because they know that the big guys have a lot of staff to go through and sift through all the detail and data and basically provide an early stamp of credibility to the campaign. So down in Kalamazoo, the big foundations would be certainly the Community Foundation, but the Irving S. Gilmore Foundation is another one. The Stryker Johnson Foundation, those are big ones. And if you can get them on board, then there are probably 5 or 6 or 7 kind of mid-tier and then a bunch of smaller family foundations. So I try not to say, hey, here's a list of 15 or 20. Good luck. Go do all those grant applications. Like, let's focus on these 2. And that's just one little piece of the big picture, one little piece of that giant puzzle.
There's a strategy behind it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a very smart strategy.
Yeah. Yep.
I would not have known that, by the way, about starting on top and working down.
Right.
I should know that because we did a campaign with Mel Trotter, and obviously we did a video with the Benando family.
Right.
So that makes sense.
Right.
So it's the same with foundations.
Right.
It's no
Same
different.
with foundations, yeah.
I am curious about what kind of culture should a nonprofit have? What cultures have you seen within nonprofits that have helped make campaigns successful? And the reason I'm asking that is because you mentioned something earlier that sometimes when you do your feasibility study that maybe some weaknesses, strengths, all of those things come to light. You're in the spotlight.
Right.
I would imagine it takes some humility by the leadership's part to recognize that without freaking out about it.
Yep.
Can you tell me what qualities that you have seen, if you've done over 300 campaigns, what qualities have you seen in the leadership that really you would say, I see these same qualities over and over and over again when there's success?
Yeah. So I would say you have to look at the individuals. It's the qualities that the individuals have. So the executive director or the CEO of the organization is important. Sometimes the board chair, but not always, because the board chair isn't always even though they're in the role of board chair, they're not always the most powerful person on the board. It might be somebody else, past board chair or somebody who's going to be a board chair in the future. And then there can be some donors who are really powerful. So I would say that the qualities that all of those people have, regardless of the role they fill, they all are humble. They all are very open to feedback, good communicators typically. Usually they're kind of natural extroverts. They like people, and they're not afraid to be engaged with people of all different, stripes, whether it's a client or a foundation donor or a major donor in the community. Easy to work with. And I would say the one thing they probably all share is just lack of ego. Wow. When I meet leaders that have big egos or are concerned about, am I going to get the credit? That's when I think we usually are going to have a problem. It's the executive director that can say, I'm just helping to guide the ship a little bit, but this is going to be a team effort and we need everybody to play a role. And if they can do that and say that and communicate that effectively, then I think we're in pretty good shape. Like, you're going to meet with Cheryl Shook later, right? And Cheryl Shook was for those people who don't know, was the local leader of Family Promise. And then she did such a great job. They elevated her to the top spot for the whole country. And she's phenomenal. She's well-liked. She's easy to talk to. She's a great communicator. She's very humble. And she's just grounded. She's just a good person. And so when you have good people like that, you're very likely to have success. That's probably the best thing about my work. I never work with people that aren't good people, because bad people don't volunteer time and they don't volunteer their money.
That's true.
Right? So I'm never in a room with a bunch of lousy people. I'm always in a room with good people with good hearts. Now, they might not all have the skill set we need, but we try to find the skills they do have and put them in the right roles to help us with the campaign. But if I know they all have good hearts and they're doing this because they want to see good things happen in their community, I can live with that. Back to MRC, down at that meeting yesterday in Kalamazoo, looking at a group of 20, 25 people, probably only 2 people in that room had relatives that were connected to MRC. There was a couple that had a son who was an MRC client with a cognitive impairment. And there was another guy who's actually one of our chairs, and he also has a son who has been at MRC for many years. But everyone else in that room, they don't have a family connection.
That's incredible.
They just all see an organization that's helping people with disabilities, and they want to help because they're good people. And so that's pretty rare, pretty cool to be in a position where every day I get to work with people like that.
That's fantastic. I love the way you put that.
That's great.
So nonprofits, you and I have worked with them for a long time. There's a lot of different attitudes whenever you mentioned the word nonprofit versus a corporation. Let me give you a quick example. There was a vice president of a local bank, and he was a nonprofit board chair, and he told them to go look for a designer who could design their logo for free. Mm-hmm. And I'm quite certain that he put his nonprofit hat on when he walked into that room. Right. I don't think his bank would have asked them. They probably would have spent $200,000 on a brand identity program, which is normal.
Yeah.
How important is it to have a business mindset in this realm, especially?
It's critical. It's critical. So what you say is not uncommon. Oftentimes I find that you get a lot of good business leaders who then come together on a nonprofit board. And sometimes I think when they walk in that nonprofit boardroom, they check their business acumen at the door. It's like, well,
please don't.
Right. We don't want that. That's why you're on the board. We wanted you to bring your expertise and your knowledge of how you run your business to this nonprofit to make it more effective and more efficient.
Yes.
But I think sometimes people join boards for lots of different reasons. Some people join boards because it's just cool to get my name on a letterhead and to be able to tell people I'm on a board. It's a status thing. And that's particularly true with colleges and hospitals and museums, particularly in bigger cities, right? Oh, I'm on the art museum board. That's a thing people pay attention to, or I'm on the college board. So that's cool. You want to be on a board for status. That's great. I hope you would come because you can bring something to the table and not just for things that you get out of it. Some people join boards for connections. They're like, I want to get to know another 20 people that I don't know and build my Rolodex. Some people come because they have a passion for the mission. Some people come just because they knew the executive director and they like him, and the executive director asked them. And so now they're on a board. So you got to encourage the people who join boards. And again, this goes back to the CEO of the nonprofit to say, listen, I brought you all here, or you all came to us through a variety of avenues because we think you can bring something to the table. We don't want you checking your knowledge base at the door. We don't want to get in here and have groupthink. When there's a dumb idea, we want you to call it out and help us improve it.
Yeah.
And if one of you says something that we think is a dumb idea, we hope that you'll accept that we might say, that's not the best way to approach this. There's another way, and to be able to push back with some courtesy, right?
Yes.
But I think, man, if nonprofits could operate more like businesses, and it's very different because there's a very big difference between a bottom line where we make money to either pay shareholders or pay, the people who own the business, versus we don't raise money so that we can put it in our own pockets. We raise money for community impacts. That's a huge distinction. But some of the basics of business, we run good financials. We always balance our books. When we look ahead to spend money, we know that we've got the revenue to support that. We have systems in place for our employees that guarantee we're going to have a good work environment. That nonprofits have huge turnover problems. Some of that's a pay issue, and some of it is I think a culture issue. There are things you can do as a nonprofit leader where if you say, hey, I can't pay as much as the for-profit sector can, but there are some other things I can give you, maybe benefits, a more flexible work schedule, things that would entice you to stay. And there's a ton that nonprofits can learn from the business world, a ton.
Yeah. Yep. I want to transition now, Keith, into how we partner together. I know we worked together on Family Promise of Grand Rapids. That was our first project together. Mel Trotter Ministries, and what ended up being, I believe, a $19 million campaign.
Yeah.
I think it began at 12 or 13.
It grew over time, yeah. And
that's a story in itself.
Yeah, and they went over goal. Yeah. Even though it kept growing because of costs were going up and the things you couldn't control. The economy was becoming more expensive, but...
And did they also expand what they wanted?
They did.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, as time went on, they found other ways to do some things that they thought were more innovative. Yep.
So when we become a partner in a campaign, we want to be a valued partner and fill in gaps where they're needed.
Yeah.
Let's use Mel Trotter as an example. Talk about our partnership with that client and how we complement each other, and from your perspective, because I know my perspective.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear it from your perspective.
Well, anytime a marketing partner comes on board, you guys do things I can't do. I mean, I've got this much creative in me. Right? You have to bring in creative people who can help tell the story in a compelling way. Now, you'll get, if we do the feasibility study, right, and a report comes out of that study, we can hand that to the marketing folks and say, you can use this as the beginnings of building a case for the things that we want to do and the money we want to raise. But I think, creatives are always better at telling stories than non-creative people are. I would say that I'm more on the data side than the creative side. But you got to have that balance. You got to have people at the table who can say, how do we tell this in the most compelling way? How do we design a brochure that will pull people in? How do we tell a story in a video? Usually brochures and videos are fairly different from each other, and that the donor community, to me, divides kind of into two groups. You got a data-driven donor, and you have more of what I would call a narrative donor, a more emotional donor. And that's not a put down or a slight in any way. But
no, certainly not.
There are some people who are, show me the data,
Yeah.
show me how much my money is going to impact the community output. How many more people can you feed? How many more people can you house? How many more kids are going to get served by your youth programs? How many more miles of trail can you build? They just like the data, right? They want to know, what's my money going to lead to in terms of hard outcomes. But you also have many people who say, tell me the story of 3 or 4 people that have been impacted by this program. How did they come to you? What problems did they have? How did you help solve their problems? What are they doing now? And nonprofits sometimes are heavy on the story and light on the data, or heavy on the data and light on the story. There needs to be a really good mix. And so the marketing partner always brings more of that narrative to the table to say, here's how, when we talk about our mission, we should talk to people, especially the donor that wants more of the emotional tug. It's really easy to come up with the data. We can find out how many people we house, and we can find out how many people we fed, and we can find out how many miles of trail we built or we plan to build, and how many baseball teams are going to come use the Rockford Youth Complex every year through tournaments. That's easy stuff to come up with. I think it's harder sometimes to tease out those compelling stories, right? Because not everybody tells a great story. You gotta find the people and pull it out of them.
I always look at it like a movie director,
right?
Like a Steven Spielberg.
Right.
Look at his gross. The gross of all the movies that he's ever done throughout his lifetime is in the billions, compared to someone who's not as talented as Steven. And it's not really, the money isn't the same, but the idea is the same about how talented is that creative group.
Yeah.
How great are they at bringing
Right.
our heart in? And
Right.
And what I loved about Mel Trotter, several things. Number one, working with you and a leadership that allowed us to take some of the revenue from the capital campaign. They didn't need to touch their annual fund, but they designated a significant amount, knowing that it was growing to 19 million. I think our scope of work on that project was the greatest scope we've ever had on a capital campaign.
Yeah.
And because of that, we said to them, why don't we leverage the money that you're invested in the campaign materials and the marketing materials? Let's leverage that for future communications. So our idea was to hire 10 actors
Right.
who
I
acted
remember.
out scenes.
Yeah, I remember that.
And we did a call to actors on social media, and 9 out of the 10 actors actually had been homeless. So when we were on set, I remember this 23-year-old kid said, yeah, when I was 18, I was sleeping underneath that viaduct.
Right.
And these people in their 20s or 30s were sharing stories together.
Yep.
Sometimes there was tears on set because they just realized, number one, they relived some of their past pain,
Right.
but also found a new friend that understood that pain.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most meaningful projects we've ever done. And we spent 3 or 4 days on location. The first series was imagery throughout the city of Grand Rapids and creating all these scenes of, we had some of the youth, we had tents underneath the viaduct on I-96, and we created that scene. We had a mother in her car with her kids sleeping in her car. And we wanted these scenes to be true to what really happens out there.
Right.
But because we had 10 actors, all different ages, different races, it really brought a beautiful library of imagery together. And then we did a couple of days inside Mel Trotter and really helped portray this is more than a bed and a meal.
Right.
Here's all the services and support and spiritual support that someone can get inside Mel Trotter. And then for those who are able to move beyond homelessness and find an apartment and a job, we even portrayed that. So we
Right.
had the full hero's journey narrative, but all because of the campaign.
Right.
They used that photo library and video library. I think just a year or two ago they changed. And
Yeah, I bet.
Probably been 4 years or so.
Yep.
That was something the whole marketing team could enjoy for
And
4 years
think
after
there's
that.
probably 2 lessons that come out of that. One is I've had many campaigns with very robust marketing budgets and not so robust marketing budgets.
Yeah.
You can do justice with either, right?
Right.
And the Mel Trotter one had a big budget. The other thing that's important for people that are listening to this and don't know this is to understand that all of the costs of a campaign, consulting costs, marketing costs, media stuff that you do, and there's lots of other ancillary things that come up, all of those costs get built back into the campaign and recovered through the campaign. The key is, at least from my perspective, is we always want to keep it as small a percentage of the goal as possible. But we also want to show it to the donors. We want the donors to know that, hey, there's a cost to raise money, and we're not trying to hide it. We want you to see it. Here's what it's costing us to raise this money. And usually a savvy donor, if they don't see a line item for campaign expenses, they're going to assume that you're either trying to hide it from them, so you're coming across as shifty, or maybe that you don't realize that there's a cost to raise the money, and now you're coming across as stupid. So you don't want either of those cases, right? Yeah. So you want to right up front, in every one of my campaigns, there's typically a line item that says campaign expenses with a total. And that encompasses all the consulting work and all the marketing stuff and all the media stuff that you're going to do. And you just try to keep it as a small percentage of your goal.
So I'm curious about that, because when I hear small, I get a little bit concerned myself, because I just had a client say no to a video project because they wanted me to give a third of the cost of the project back to them. Oh. And I don't always like small.
Yeah. Well, it's harder.
Can you give me what's a realistic percentage where they have a 2 million or 20 million campaign? What percentage would you recommend?
I always would like to keep the total cost under 5 to 7% of the goal.
That's
if possible.
Very reasonable. Yeah.
Now, it's a lot easier when your goal is big, right? If it's a $15 million campaign, that's a big chunk there's a much bigger budget to play with. And so I would suspect, like the Mel Trotter campaign, as you remember, was 19 million when it was all said and done. So they had a bigger budget to work with because they tried to keep it, I think they probably kept it even below 3% would be my guess.
Yeah.
With smaller budgets, if it's a $1.5 million campaign, that becomes more of a challenge. So sometimes organizations will say, hey, we can do the print stuff internal, but we can't do the video. So we got to hire a video firm, or vice versa. We've got somebody on staff that we think maybe could do a little video stuff, but we need the print stuff. You can do it that way. You just have to make sure those two groups are working real well together and talking to each other.
Yeah.
Right. So the higher the goal, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, and I have found, just like you said, a $2 million campaign or $2 to $5 million. Even at that, though, if we just are hired to create one really good video and a really beautiful case for support brochure, they could run with the rest, and it still isn't that costly then at that point.
Right.
But the quality of those two pieces are going to be so important.
Right. Yeah, because you have to remember, many of the donors you're going to talk to when you're doing your campaign, they're being talked to by other organizations. And they've seen lots of other videos. They've seen lots of other brochures.
Right. Yeah.
And so they have those in the back of their mind. And when they see yours, the first thing they're going to say is, how does this compare to all the other stuff I've seen?
Absolutely.
Is it high quality? Does it answer my questions? Is it data driven? Does it have some stories? Who's involved in the leadership? Can I see their names? I always want leadership to be right up front in a campaign brochure, because I know when the donor opens that up, the first thing they're going to do is look at the names and ask themselves, do I know any of these people? And if they do, that helps to build credibility right out of the gate. So now they're more willing to listen to the story.
Yes.
If they say, well, I know Joe, he's a good guy. If he's on this thing, this must be good. And I know Susan, if she's part of this has got to be worth me giving it a look, right?
Yes.
So, there's a lot of nuance to it.
Yeah, we have felt that to do all the things that you had just said, every piece of that is important. And if I could only get hired to do a 2-minute video, I want to create that video, if possible, on the hero's journey narrative of 1 or 2 or 3 clients, and have a real in-depth, or as depth as we can in 2 or 3 minutes, story that really brings someone's heart in, because they're going to see all the other information in that case statement and in conversations.
Yeah. The challenge is always, how do we tell this story in such a short period of time so people will actually watch the video, right? I mean, that's because we, as a society, we're just losing attention span as we get older and older, and the younger people have even shorter attention spans than you and I do. And so now you're like, boy, can I get somebody to watch a 2 to 3 minute video, or do I have to carve it up into smaller snippets? Yeah, it's always a big challenge.
We had that challenge with MRC.
I bet. Yeah.
Because we had interviewed three clients, and then we had the interviews with the leadership.
Yeah.
And Joel, our editor, is the one who was the genius. Because I said, Joel, I don't know what to do with this. I'm only down to like 5 or 6 minutes, maybe. Yeah. And I said, Joel, I don't know what to do. Here.
Work your magic.
and he took the most powerful story, which it truly was. It was a mother who had been traumatized by bullets whizzing through her home and helped save, I think, 3 children. But her story of coming out of that trauma and not wanting to see anybody or go outside, and how MRC, their staff, step by step, brought her back into where she could be part of her children's lives and part of society
with
again.
The community around her.
And just be a beautiful person to meet.
Yeah.
That was incredible how Joel wove her story into all the other statements that helped us understand the scope of what MRC does, but woven within the fabric of one powerful story.
Yep.
That was masterful, Joel.
Yeah,
Great
way to go,
job.
Joel.
Is there anything else, Keith, that I'm missing about capital campaigns?
I don't think so. I mean, it's, again, hard to convey this in 40 minutes, but my hope would be, I think if there's a kind of a takeaway from this, my hope would be that if there's anyone out there in the nonprofit world thinking of a campaign, don't be intimidated by it, because it's easy to be intimidated by it when you hear of the work that's involved, but think through very carefully how you want to approach it. This is not something to do on the back of an envelope. This is something to say, okay, let's sit down and decide, who do we have to have at the table to make sure that if we're going to do this, we do it really well? Because campaigns have a magnifying effect or a diminishing effect. If they go really well, as I said earlier, they shine a spotlight on you. It will have all kinds of good spin-off, right? People will feel good about the outcome of the campaign. Donors will feel good. Volunteers will feel good. Some of them may eventually join your board. You're very likely to have staff feeling good, and it's particularly the development person who's like, wow, I've never done a campaign, and we just raised $5 million in a year. But there's also the risk of a diminishing effect. You screw it up on the front end. You don't plan it well. You're not ready to answer questions when they come. You start to stall out early. Now the organization appears to be disorganized, not on top of detail. That becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. That causes donors to give it a second look. Do I really want to put my money here? There are lots of places I could put my money. And it can really impact not only the internals, but also the externals of an organization. So you got to do it right.
Right back to what we talked about. It's high stakes.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Keith, thank you so much for joining me today. That's been fantastic. I appreciate your expertise. I've learned so much today.
Good.
And I thought I wasn't going to be because we had worked together so often. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for the invite. Good being here.